Welcome, everybody. Welcome for the third panel of Digital Dialogue, our special series dedicated to art and technology, and the last conversation of this edition here in Miami Beach in 2025. This panel is entitled Infinite Scroll, Art, Algorithm, and Image Today, and it's really an artist panel. We're very lucky to have three artists on stage today. Maya Mann, Kiya Tadele from the collective Yatreda, and Jack Butcher. This panel is moderated by my dear friend and colleague, Dr. Jeni Fulton. So please join me in giving Maya, Kiya, Jack, and Jeni a very warm welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Colleen, and welcome also from my side to the final panel of our conversation series at Art Basel Miami Beach. Now, just a quick question to you all. How many of you here have visited 010? Okay, fantastic, because all of these lovely artists are presenting works inside that sector, so do go check them out. When I was working on this panel, I was really thinking through how visual culture has changed over the last sort of 5 to 10 years. And that's why I called it Infinite Scroll, Art, Algorithms, and the Hyper-Contemporary Image. So today we're going to explore what is the hyper-contemporary image, what do algorithms do to art, what do platforms do to art, what does it mean when art is not special, but rather something we see when we scroll through Instagram, when we go on OpenSea and we're bombarded by so many images of NFTs. And how can art have a unique presence, or can it have a unique presence within this sort of set of circumstances? And I wanted to begin the panel by, well, first of all, introducing our lovely panelists. So to my immediate left, I have Kiya Tadele of Yatreda. And Yatreda is an Ethiopian family-based digital collective, weaving together nostalgic tizita aesthetics. We can see some of these examples here. Oral histories and blockchain-native formats to reframe heritage through the lens of the networked image. Please give a warm welcome to Kiya. Then in the middle, we have Maya Mann. And she examines online identity and performances with works that inhabit the browser, the timeline, and the closet. Projects like the browser extension Glance Back and the art block series Fake It Till You Make It. And she interrogates femininity, authenticity, and algorithmic self-representation. And then last not least, the gentleman right at the end, Jack Butcher. His practice explores how value emerges in network culture. As a founder of Visualized Value, he distills markets, scarcity, and consensus into minimalist visual systems, making the shape of the digital economy visible. Welcome, Jack. I wanted to start with a quote from an essay that was first published, I think, in 2001. It's from a text by by an artist, actually, called Seth Price. And the essay is Dispersion. And 2001 was pretty much when we'd had about 5 years of the internet being widely accessible. Through the World Wide Web, through browsers, we had our first kind of search functions. And Seth Price was really thinking about, what does this mean for art? And he was very optimistic. And he said, distributed media can be defined as social information circulating in theoretically unlimited quantities in the common market, stored or accessed via portable devices such as books and magazines, records and compact discs, videotapes and DVDs, personal computers and data diskettes. New artistic strategies are needed to keep up with the commercial distribution, decentralization, and dispersion of art. So what happens to art if we go outside the museum, outside the gallery, outside of the artistic studio, spaces where it comes from? And I think this text is dated because, I mean, who still here uses videotapes and really compact discs? Probably no one, or very few people. But also, what does it mean in an age where we have social media algorithms, where we purchase from Depop, as this artwork by Maya? And we're going to go into this. So, to the panel, your works don't just circulate on platforms, they're shaped by them. What does it mean to treat distribution channels like Instagram, TikTok, Chrome extensions, or NFT marketplaces as artistic mediums in their own right? Maya, perhaps we can start with you, thinking through Fake It Till You Make It.
Yeah, so Fake It Till You Make It is a project of mine that focuses on self-help and wellness Instagram culture, especially those text-driven graphics that say things like, believe in yourself or be confident today, that type of thing. And for this particular piece, I wrote an algorithm. So it's essentially just JavaScript that infinitely generates output that is meant to look like these graphics that if you've ever been on Instagram, I'm sure that you've seen something that looks like this is it. Before, each one of these are outputs from the algorithm that I wrote. And so, but if you read, it says things that are a little bit absurd. Today is your newest thought, or inhale your faith, or scare the people that follow you. It's language that is a little bit strange. And so to your question, I think for so long, artists have always kind of pulled from the material that is around them in the world that they're living in the city that they're living in. And for me, growing up really, with such a large percentage of my life lived through the internet and spending time online, it's very natural to pull from that as a kind of material and reference. And so with a lot of my work, like Fake It Till You Make It, I really like when something looks like something that exists out there that you've seen online before, but once you get a little bit closer, there's a bit of a twist. And so with this piece, the twist is that everything is not generated by a person or a designer, but it's all generated by an algorithm. And I think it's important that we can kind of introduce that lens of looking to the online space in the way that artists have for so long in the physical world.
I mean, you cite Petra Kortright as an influence. You cite someone like Amalia Ullman as a presence. What makes your work different? I mean, Amalia did her kind of, how would you say, foundational Instagram series in 2014. We're now in 2025. What would you say the difference is?
Yeah, I mean, Amalia and Petra are two fantastic artists who both deal with kind of the performance of femininity online in different ways in their work. And I think what is really crucial to me in my work is that I often am writing software. And so thematically, a lot of what I'm interested in is similar to what they were interested in, but I'm often writing code to produce the works that I'm making. And what I like about code is that, it live executes and makes a random series of decisions, and there's a kind of inherent performance quality to that.
Mm-hmm.
So I really value that as a kind of other weight that's happening in the work. And also, Amalia's piece, Excellence in Imperfections, debuted in 2014, which is now over a decade ago. And I think there's a kind of level of comfort that everyone has with being online now, and then at the time that they were, with both Petra and Amalia were just starting to make work about performance online, it was much more radical or almost taboo to be posting online, and now it's something that's almost trivial much more in a way, and so the culture has changed a lot.
I think when they were first starting out, it wasn't considered as an artwork, or there was a lot of ambiguity, especially around Amalia's work, because I remember seeing it, and people were like, is she really an influencer? How can she be an artist if she's an influencer? And I think those questions have kind of gone away.
Definitely. And I think now one of the big questions that's emerged is how, at the time as an artist, and she's talked about this, it wasn't seen as a positive thing to be posting on Instagram necessarily. And now that's something that a lot of artists are, you're always having conversations about what's the right way to share your work online, what's the right way to post. So it's really different.
Jack, you started out as a graphic designer, and your work is heavily influenced by graphic design.
Mm-hmm.
At what point did you decide you wanted to be an artist?
Never made a decision, really. It was just an accident. So the graphic design practice I started in 2019 or so, like an independent design studio, and ran through a bunch of different iterations of that and ended up at this really simple visual constraint that's now become this bigger thing called visualized value, but it was a hyper, honestly, not dissimilar to the outputs of the previous work we're referencing, had a very specific aesthetic, and I just stuck to that constraint for thousands of iterations. And through posting that for a couple of years, a couple of people reached out to me and asked me if they could collect those objects, and I just responded like, I'm not sure what you mean. I'm not going to print these out. They're Instagram posts. And that's where I was introduced to Ethereum as a medium, and the network that already existed around the work, I guess, began to support it as an art practice rather than like a commercial service that I was doing. So that is essentially how this thing turned from like a design hobby practice to like a full-on art practice, I suppose.
And that was really made possible because you started sending your works as NFTs, and you were a big, you were shaped by a large part, I think, by the OpenSea community, by the platforms you were selling on, and you were being recommended by other artists within that space.
Yeah, and I think the types of things I was interested in and the things I was making work about were inherently interesting to people who pay attention to the very edge of technology. So there was like a built-in audience that may not have been a traditional set of art collectors from the beginning that were, you know, interested in blockchains as mediums and not necessarily art collectors. And then when I started to practice work in that medium, I had a little bit of traction as opposed to trying to enter the quote unquote art world without having that audience that's already followed my work.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting the way you kind of went through the back door of the art world, so to speak. And obviously here we are at an art fair, and this is pretty much kind of the epicenter of the art market as is. I just have one more question for you regarding the work that you have downstairs, which is self-checkout. And it's always a bit of a taboo in the art world to kind of really talk about pricing, talk about how much a work of art is worth, because it's seen as financializing the work, it's seen as putting economic interests above artistic interests or curatorial interests or cultural interests. And yet you meet that head on. Like in your booth, basically, we started out at $70,000, which I believe is the cost for you to
Minus 70,000, yeah.
Minus 70,000. And we're now at minus 4,880. So basically your quid's in. So how, as an artist, do you approach this like dissonance between kind of cultural value, economic value, and pricing systems?
Well, I guess what's interesting is the art world that I've been participating in has always been transparent. So that's not unusual for me downstairs to have everybody know what your work sells for, what people price it at, because every single piece of work I put out before this has that characteristic. There's zero opacity around it. So I think there's something to be said also for making it accessible at a level where people consider the value of the network as potentially greater than the sum of its parts. So the idea that you could make something accessible and turn it into something more interesting in the future, that's been the kind of the key to a couple of the bigger projects that I've worked on, is you find resonance for something at a very accessible price point, and then you have this malleable medium essentially to iterate on that and listen to what people are saying about it and how they're interacting with it and turn it into something that can eventually run by itself, but it's like a super iterative process to get there.
I mean, I think it's quite interesting from the point of view that I also teach undergraduate, and one of the classes and one of the big questions I always get asked is, how do I price my artworks? And so then to come in and say, well, actually, it's what people want to pay for them, is quite a radical approach. Now I want to move to you, Kiya. Yatreda's digital canvases that we can see some very beautiful examples of here become a space where Ethiopian legends are not just retold, but re-envisioned, engaging with themes of memory, identity, and resilience against the backdrop of Ethiopia's rich historical tapestry. Can you talk about translating oral history into digital spaces?
Translating the Ethiopian oral history. Yatreda's artwork is more about Ethiopian culture, Ethiopian history, but when you ask me about oral history, I have one artwork. It's called Abyssinian Queen. And the story is she's Ethiopian queen, and we don't have any...
This one here?
Yeah, exactly, this one. We don't have any reference photos or anything that I could pull out and research and use as to learn. And then I decided to sketch it myself because it's oral history. Just me and my sister knows it, and many people knows it, but there's no one has ever done anything about it. And the story goes two-person. The queen is carried by the people. So I sketched 2% front and 2% from the back, and then I give it to my sister, and then she multiplied the cast. She multiplied them because it was easy for her to paint, and to bring it to life, I made the character, And so the idea is not only about bringing back like the powerful king that we have, even though I'm inspired by what they did. It's more about how I tell the story from the Ethiopian side. So this is the way I say it.
And what made you make the decision to distribute your work on the blockchain?
What made me to use blockchain is because when I think about putting my artwork on Instagram, putting it on YouTube, it's just it doesn't solve the problem, because it's just okay. I post my artwork on Instagram. It's just stuck there. It doesn't have any future. It doesn't have anything. It's just stay there. But when I meet my artwork on the blockchain, people understand. I found my community, which is a digital art community. They understand my vision. They start supporting me. So that's why I meet my artwork, and I decided to work in that medium.
It's very interesting because both Jack and you were talking about finding your people, and probably Maya as well, like in the digital space. And how did this impact your artistic practice? I mean, so when you went from Instagram to the blockchain, how did you find new audiences and new distributive networks?
So the first platform that I introduced myself for the public was Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
And before I had like 12 people that followed me. It might be like my family. And the artwork was about Ethiopian history, about how Ethiopia is a never colonized country. I make 6 motion portraits, and then I share it on Twitter, and then people start sharing it around, and it was something fresh. It was something new that is like they never heard of, like about a never colonized country, women artists from Ethiopia telling the story.
Mm-hmm.
And then using this story and using the most futuristic technology, blockchain. So using these two things, people were wondering, and then they start sharing it, love the story. So that's how that's how it started everything. So I found my community. Why I say that is when the first time when I heard about NFTs, digital art, my expectation is like just one specific art, and I wasn't sure my own will be celebrated or accepted. But when I meet my artwork, the way I want it, which is motion portrait, they love the story, they love everything, and they start supporting me. So right now it has been like 5 years. So I become like one of these people. I feel like I belong with these people, even though my artwork is like so different with Maya. My art is different with Jack. It's just this is like when I see him winning, I feel like okay, this is like we are winning. That's how I see it.
That's such a beautiful answer. And I guess, I mean, you went viral in 2021, right? And then that immediately expanded your audience. And that's, in a way, only possible through the distribution systems that we have now. And which brings me to a question to all three of you, actually. Where do you want audiences to encounter your work first? On a phone, on chain, in a gallery, in a museum, and why? Maybe Maya.
Okay, what I love about making work that's digitally native is that I believe that you can be seeing the truest form of the work on your computer. If you go to the website and you see the live running code and you're viewing it in your browser, that to me is totally the work in its truest form and how you're meant to see it. But also, of course, it's very important for me to also be presenting the work in an exhibition context, in a gallery or in an institution, and that, you know, is just as true of a way to encounter the work. And I personally really value having both, you know, both kind of pathways in my practice, and I think that's something that you know, it just simply isn't possible if you're working with more traditional materials to have such a such multiplicity with a work that can be existing in its true form in multiple places at the same time. And something that I really love about distributing my work online, in addition to showing in a more traditional gallery or a museum context, is that people will encounter your work who maybe aren't people who are thinking they would go to a gallery on a Saturday afternoon. And this kind of goes back to what I love about that text Dispersion by Seth Price that you referenced in the beginning, because he was very optimistic writing it about, what the internet could do for artists in terms of distributing work. And I, even though we're much further along in the kind of narrative of what the internet has become, I still share that optimism about it, despite also having a lot of criticism of the development of the internet. But yeah, and so I think both are really important, and I don't necessarily privilege one or the other. And I love the idea that someone who is not necessarily interested in contemporary art might find the work, and then that would be a doorway for them to be interested in the work. Yeah.
And Jack, where should audiences encounter your work?
I think mostly it's internet, phone. Given the chance to exhibit something at a place like this is like a creative brief to do something that I couldn't do on the internet, or like produce an experience that can't happen through a phone. Essentially, would be the only time I think I could do something interesting enough to warrant physically being in a space. Would be probably different than a large amount of the stuff I do online, but communicate the same values, hopefully.
I mean, I think it's interesting because the performativity of your work obviously shifts register. You have interactivity. You've got people actually, scanning their credit cards, printing out the receipts. You've got this level of physicality there. So how does it feel when you see this kind of performativity that you don't control inside your work?
Well, what's funny? I think there's like way more of a parallel to minting work on Ethereum in just reproducing a commercial environment, because you do experience the same thing when you have for example, an open edition mint on Ethereum. You are doing the same thing in a distributed way. You're watching a ledger and you're watching these transactions happen and you're watching these objects move around, and it's trying to bring that exact same experience in, and maybe hopefully validate this idea that like the transaction can be doesn't have to be the thing you shy away from or you don't talk about or you have to kind of obfuscate. It's a celebration of somebody saying, this is worth X to me, I'm going to pay for it, and I want the people around me to know I paid for it. And I don't know, I feel like some people sort of view that as a cynical take on it, and I would much rather it be seen as like artists being transparent about the fact they're getting paid or asking to be paid for the work they're doing. To me is the only other option you have is basically surrender your margin to someone who can sell things better than you can. And there's nothing wrong with doing that. It's just if you can encourage people to use the tools that exist to maximize the amount of like economic connection they can form with other people, I think that's net positive.
I think that's a very good point, actually, but it's also a rather complicated one because galleries do more than just, take 50%.
No, that's true. I wasn't trying to say that. That's true. That's true. And I think the medium of Ethereum as money is only one component of that medium. I think that's the thing that gets overshadowed and obviously blown up in a headline is this image sold for what would be considered an obscene amount of money and you can't touch it, but there are also these artworks on Ethereum that just physically cannot exist in whatever physical medium you want to make them in. So I agree. And I think if you are selling the type of work that galleries have expertise in connecting you to the right people, absolutely, this is what you should do.
So you mentioned NFTs. Let's talk about NFTs. Bit of a controversial subject. Some people embrace them, other people are much more negative about it. Kiya, you made one of the first institutional sales of an NFT to the Toledo Museum of Art back in 2024. Jack, you've been very successful financially with Visualize Value. And Maya, you've sold many NFTs, but are on record with being rather skeptical as the medium. Can we talk about the role of the NFT today? Perhaps, Kiya.
For 2024, I was the digital artist in residency for Toledo Museum of Art. And at the end, they acquire my artwork, the Abyssinian Queen that we got to see earlier. So when they acquired the artwork, they decided to go on-chain. Mm-hmm. I'm gonna tell you like exactly what they say in their voice, because usually when you buy art from, let's say, Europe, you just buy it with euro, and then when it's Chinese, you do it with their currency. When it's in Japan, you do it in their currency. The artists just practice in the blockchain, so they didn't want to change it. They didn't want me to like convert and go on all those. They decided to adapt where I am, so I'm grateful.
So basically, they had to open a wallet. They had to get Ethereum. I remember this being a giant discussion at the Centre Pompidou, who, when they bought their CryptoPunks, it was actually a big financial governance question. But I'm thinking probably the Toledo Museum of Art is a bit more kind of digital first than the Pompidou, despite the Pompidou's rich and storied history. So it was a bit less of an issue for them.
Yes, Toledo Museum of Art, they believe in the art, the digital art. Even there's one show, Ethiopia at the Crossroad, mm-hmm.
And
when I work with the curator, Sophie, she used to open her show about Ethiopian history, and she borrowed artifacts from Ethiopia that is more than 1,000 years artifacts. But she opened the exhibition using the artwork that I make. It's about Mother of Minilik. Mm-hmm. The artist talk about the relationship between the Queen of Sheba, how Queen of Sheba traveled and had relationship with King Solomon. With that relationship, they have a son together named Minilik, and the Solomonic dynasty starts from that. So she used that artwork to continue the Solomonic dynasty, and then beside my artwork, which is digital, mm-hmm. She had a sculpture that was about Haile Selassie. Mm-hmm. So they believe in the artwork. They show it very proudly.
I think it's amazing how they contextualized your work within that 1,000-year history, because it really says that the art that is being produced today comes within a rich timeline of art history. Maya, your view on NFTs?
My view on NFTs. I mean, it's funny it is so controversial, because my view on NFTs, the actual technology, is that it's really a certificate for digital work, and I've released work that uses the NFT as a certificate because it makes total sense for digital work. And I think it's been there's so much conversation swirling around what that means, but at the core, I have a deep belief in digital art, and I have a deep belief in the value of digital objects, which has just been a difficult problem for artists who work with. Basically, artists who work outside of, the really, painting and sculpture for a while, figuring out, how do you have an arts practice that fits into a system that's really built around, scarcity of the object, and that's just inherently not how digital objects operate. And so my view of NFTs is that it's amazing and there should be a way for us to be able to value and have a digital certificate for digitally native work. That said, I think like the question of it being controversial and the kind of culture around NFTs, people have lots of different reactions to and opinions on. But what I believe is that, there's so much diversity in the practice of artists working with technology. And I think some people might have been introduced to, a select few examples of artists working with NFTs or working with technology, and maybe you love it or maybe you don't. And so people react in different ways. But what in the same way that there's so much work here at Basel, I walk around the fair, there's a lot of work that I absolutely love, and it's so special to see in person. There's work that I don't feel strongly about or maybe don't love as much. And I think that diversity of practices exists in the digital art space. And I think what I hope in the future that, this technology allows for is for a diversity of practices to flourish and for people to understand that this is really just something that can underpin and support a digital art market, essentially. So.
Indeed. I mean, it's very interesting because I was speaking to a gentleman who is in the audience here, Stephen Sachs, of Bitforms Gallery yesterday, and we were talking about how he still accompanies an NFT with a paper certificate, because NFTs are also pretty unstable at times, and people lose access to wallets, they get hacked, there's a degree of financial fraud involved at times, and that's, while putting a paper certificate in a safe might feel a bit old school, it's still a way of having a physicality attached to a digital artwork in your own space where okay, I can prove the provenance of this piece. So I think it's pretty interesting in that sense. Jack, what's your experience in terms of the stability of NFTs?
Oh, not stable at all. Depends on what you mean by stable. Price stability.
No, not price. We all know that.
But the idea of the object, the stability of the object and the endurance of the object, if it's looked after in the right way, is, I think, you can make the argument that done properly, these things are indestructible in a way that physical art is not.
Done right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think.
Well, even if you lose access to it, it exists.
Yes.
So I think the idea of your ownership and your the care with which you maintain your ownership of an object is the thing versus an object that can be destroyed whether you own it or not.
I wanted to switch gear a little bit, and I wanted to talk about aesthetics. Right? So we all see here different ways of visualizing very contemporary culture. And I wanted to think about what has happened to the aesthetics in the extreme present, when much of new ways of seeing, of what we see, what we perceive, the images that surround us, are driven by AI. And AI mines the past to create novelty, right? So AI is not creating anything new, it's trained on systems that already exist. So, big question, has the past sucked the oxygen out of the present? Maya?
I don't think so, because I feel very excited about what's happening now, but I think there's an inherent quality to the way, the networked nature of the internet that kind of encourages this recycling of imagery in the same way you're talking about how AI models are trained, they're trained on massive amounts of data that exists in the world, but also in the way that particularly social media platforms operate, which often when we talk about the internet now, what we're really talking about are social media platforms. But, there's built into these platforms, these kind of repost functions, these redistribution mechanisms for content to be recycled over and over again. And I think that creates a completely new way of looking, but I personally feel really energized by it and not sour about it. And maybe it's because I feel like I really grew up in a culture where there was kind of this excitement around emulating and recycling what you see online. And I think formally, if we're talking about aesthetics, collage is something a strategy that I use a lot in my work that artists have used for forever. But, collage is often about taking different pieces from discrete sources and kind of compiling together them on a single plane in some way. And so I think, and to kind of make new meaning out of what you're pulling from these discrete sources. And so I think it's really exciting that artists are aware of what has shifted in the extreme present and then are kind of reconfiguring quite naturally, I think, but reconfiguring their practices to adapt to that and comment on it. And so I think it's exciting, but it's also chaotic and overwhelming.
Jack?
Honestly, I like Maya's answer. I don't really have that much to add.
It was very comprehensive, and I quite like the way we were cycling through the red shoes as well as when you were giving that answer, which is about collage. It's about drawing from Depop. It's about it's about descriptions that people use when they're trying to sell their shoes. So it is about almost like a communal form of art practice that then you distill and bring together.
Yeah, and I think it's so. I mean, this piece, the red shoes, it uses Depop listings, the social shopping app of what people have posted. And I think it's so intimate and beautiful to see, just one example of what someone has shared online. You kind of peer into people's lives in this really visceral way, and that's something that the internet has really allowed. But of course, there's so much data in online, but in this work too. And so I think that kind of like zooming in and zooming out, I find it very emotional and exciting. Yeah.
Kiya, you talked about how you were presenting your work on Twitter, how you're putting on an Instagram. How do you slow down looking, the act of looking, in a world of infinite scrolling?
In our very fast-paced lifestyle, slowing down, I practice it in two ways. One is my personal life, one is in my artwork. And in my personal life, I use the Ethiopian coffee ceremony, which is very slow. When you invite the Ethiopian people, when you invite people to your house, the Ethiopian coffee, you have to know, like, you're gonna spend a lot of time because it's starting from washing, drinking it, and more gossip. So Sunday with my family, I slow down time together with my family. And when we come to my artwork, I try to people to slow down, especially when they see my artwork, especially when this running time, people would tell you, like, you have to make artwork. Everyone is like, has short span attention, like everything has to be this, but I didn't change like that. Everyone, when we are on our phone, we are in our phone. We just need just for our addiction. And then when you are in the museum, it's more, you slow down. So when you see my artwork, which is created to loop forever, it's more slowing down. So that's how I practice.
Maya?
It's really hard, but I think I really feel like my practice is a kind of way through the deluge of content. I don't know how I would live in it otherwise. It's so overwhelming to live amongst so much imagery all the time. And so I think for me, following certain obsessions or interests and really zooming in on kind of one part of being online or of culture that I'm interested in. I mean, like this piece, The Red Shoes, is just, it's such a specific slice of a very specific data set online. And so, and that really helps me feel like I'm slowing down in some way and focusing on something and researching around something hyper specific, which I feel much more anchored in the time I spend online when I'm kind of working around something like that. Yeah, but it's also good to take some time off of screen also. So, basic activities like going for a run or a walk is really generative
Touch some
for
grass.
Me. Yeah.
Jack.
Yeah.
I don't really, I don't think. I just haven't been able to for quite a while. Got 3 little kids as well, so when I'm not doing this, I'm doing that.
Yep, indeed. So here we have a presentation. You've presented your works at an art fair not so often yet. I think you did Paris Photo back in November, and now you're here. So I wanted to talk about what shifts when a digital piece becomes physical. And I wanted to start with you, Kiya, actually, because you're to my left. You have this beautiful presentation downstairs where you have a crown that you made in collaboration with a jewelry company. Then you have a big screen with one of your videos. So how did that installation come together?
So what I'm presenting for 010, it's called 21st Century Akodama. It's a crown that worn by male warriors. And it comes in 2 mediums, but those 2 mediums are connected. They are one artwork. I see them as one artwork. It's because one is something that you see the physical sculpture, and the video that you are seeing, which is 6 minutes long video, it's from the first person's perspective. So I see them 2 medium in one. So you just experience 2 things. One is you got to see the physical sculpture. One is you embody the warrior who wears the akodama, or the male crown that we are seeing. Mm-hmm. and I'm collaborating with Asprey Studio. It's made out of silver. And I'm trying to do both.
Maya.
Yeah, I've been thinking, this is something I've thought about before, but especially with this presentation at 010. I'm with Bitform's gallery and in a presentation alongside the artist Casey Reese and Manfred Moore, two legendary pioneers of software-based work. And what I've been really thinking about in particular for my installation, there's, the wall is painted a lavender color and there's vinyl text on the wall that's sourced from the actual piece. But I've been thinking about installation as a method of introducing metadata for a digital work, because the installation is not part of each individual work itself, but I love having the chance to kind of give a particular, provide a particular perspective on the way that I would want the digital work to be seen, and kind of give it a universe, and give the audience for the work information that they just simply could not have if they were only viewing the work, pulling up the URL in their browser. And so I really like being able to kind of add details that add other layers of information to the work that itself that's not necessarily part of the work. And so that's been really exciting to be able to do at 010. And I think also, of course, at a place like Art Basel, you have all these people who are coming to the fair and maybe are seeing your work for the first time. And so it's just kind of this.
You're getting a lot of direct responses, aren't you? Whereas online, you can have people in the comments, you can have retweets, subtweets, whatever, but you are getting a lot of very visceral reactions. I mean, Jack, we were speaking about this earlier in the green room, how people were coming up to you and saying, well, what is this? And so how do you respond to that sort of situation?
Well, yeah, to answer the original question, I feel like the thing that you get to do, which is similar to the internet, depending on the way the thing is built, like a two-way medium, in especially the way that the self-checkout is set up, is you kind of see the network form in real time. So on the first day, kind of people are like weirdly skeptical, or a few people will participate and people are kind of standing back and watching. And then over the following days, you have somebody that did it yesterday bring their friend to do it the following day. And then you see like the fidelity of the idea gets a little bit better between those two people, and then maybe that person passes it on. And it's really not dissimilar to how the internet works when you have, an object that people resonate with and they start to interact with, or like a collection of objects. So yeah, I feel like trying to bring the things that are beautiful about the internet to a physical space in terms of how these objects can connect people in ways they wouldn't expect to be connected is the thing that's been most interesting and rewarding about this experience for me.
Super. Just one last question, actually. So, given your distinct yet overlapping practices, how do you imagine the next chapter of the networked image? What visual cultures might emerge from new technologies, new communities, and new forms of storytelling? Who wants to go first?
I'll go.
You'll go? Okay.
I'll go. I think I will go to like the AI answer, in that like I feel like the way we kind of interact with AI as a generation that had a creative practice before it existed will not talk to it in the same way that people like did not have that transition, and like our level of communication with these systems will be terribly low fidelity compared to the people that are coming up behind us that like will be able to speak like an alien language to these things. So I forget what the question was, but that's how I've been thinking about.
It was about the future of network culture.
Yes,
so I think that's
just
a
like
good
things
answer.
just alien stuff you can't even possibly imagine how it was made or what the process was, because your relationship to the technology is still like other. It's hard to rewire your brain and get back to that as a native medium.
Well, I was born in 1981, so I remember a world before the internet, when we still had telephones and we still couldn't find people, and if you didn't turn up in a certain spot, you wouldn't meet them, kind of thing. And so I imagine it's kind of same kind of shift in thinking almost, because I've noticed the way that we correspond, as you say, with the LLMs, especially for examples in search. Like, I like traditional Google search. I don't like this little text snippet that comes up, because I'm like, can I trust you? I don't trust you, really. You might be making stuff up, and I don't like that. So, but yeah, I think probably my daughter, who is 3, will have an entirely different approach to all of this.
I would imagine.
Maya, talk about the future of the networked image.
Yeah, I mean, I've been workshopping this term in my mind, this to describe the practices of artists who work with found material from on the internet. This idea of kind of being media maxed, this feeling that there's just such an abundance of imagery that you're seeing all the time, and kind of your practice being a way to sift through all that. And I think the existence and the ability to make imagery is just becoming increasingly trivial with the ease of most like default image creation. So I feel really excited and inspired by artists who are finding ways to kind of comment on that phenomenon in their work in some way, through the organization and collection of found media objects, or through the production of new imagery, but with a really kind of bespoke angle on it. So yeah.
Great. Kiya, last words.
So the way I see it, the future is going to be more handmade, because I feel like AI is doing AI technology. We are getting a lot of things done with using this technology. I feel like the future is gonna be more handmade, and people will be more seeking to that. So that's what I see.
That's a very interesting contrast to Jack. All right, thank you everyone for coming. Please join me in giving our speakers a big hand.
Thank you from Art Basel. Thank you to all of us for taking us to the frontier of image making, whether that means going back to the handmade or going full AI and maybe somewhere in the middle as well. This concludes our conversations program here at Basel Miami Beach. So thank you all for coming, and come back next year. We'll be here for more. Thank you again.